This is the recipe for Delia Smith's traditional English Christmas cake or traditional fruit cake. It comes from Delia Smith's Christmas book, which I believe is still available on Amazon in a used condition, so I recommend you get it. It's not just for cakes, but it's also all things for cooking at Christmas. One of the benefits of making your own Christmas cake rather than buying it is you can add the things you do like and remove the things that you don't like. So I don't like currants, so I substitute the currants with more sultanas and more raisins. I also like cherries and walnuts, so I add those extra cherries and I add walnuts, which are not even in Delia's original recipe. So it makes it tailor-made to how you like it. So the first thing we need to do is we need to pre-soak the fruit. Now Delia calls for a couple of teaspoons of brandy. I prefer whiskey, and I think a couple of teaspoons is not enough. So what I do is I add all my dried fruit to a large bowl. So here we can see the golden raisins have gone in, which are the sultanas, and then the normal raisins are going to go in next. So there's 450 grams of each of those, so that's 900 grams of fruit, which is around about 2 pounds. So it's about a pound of the raisins and a pound of the golden raisins. Next in are the walnuts, then the flaked almonds. This is the candied peel. I have done a YouTube video on the candied peel. I'll put a link, in the description, so you can follow that. And last thing in are the glacé cherries. Give that a good mix to try and break up all the lumps. Oftentimes the fruit sticks together. And then you want to use whiskey. I'm using a mid-range Canadian whiskey on this year. It depends how your year's going. If you're feeling pretty flush, you can spread out and splash out and put an expensive whiskey in. If times are hard, you can go for a cheap whiskey. I've gone mid-range this year, and to be honest, I found for the soaking of the fruit, the quality of the whiskey really doesn't make that much difference. I have used an expensive single malt in the past, and I think it's probably lost a little bit. You're better off saving the good quality whiskey for when you feed the cake, which you'll see at the end of this video. So once you've got your fruit on to soak, you want to leave that for a couple of days, and all of that alcohol will absorb into the fruit. I know it looks like there's a lot. I'm put around about 400 mils, or I think about 12 fluid ounces in there, but it does all soak into the fruit, and it makes it super tasty. The next thing you do is you want to gather all your ingredients together to make sure you've got them all. And the first thing we can do, as you can see, is we're going to sift that flour. I think in the old days the flour used to be a little bit lumpy, and you'd maybe get some bits of husk in there, but modern flour is pretty well refined, so you don't really see anything. But I do still sift it anyway. It just adds a little bit of extra air into there, which is going to make the cake a little bit lighter. Then we add our spices. The recipe does call for a mixed spice, which we can't really get in the US. So I use a quarter of a teaspoon of allspice and a quarter of a teaspoon of cinnamon. And then we're going to grate some fresh nutmeg in there. If you can't get fresh nutmeg, ground nutmeg will be fine. Again, it's just a quarter of a teaspoon. We don't want to overpower it. And then the last thing to add spice wise is salt, a half a teaspoon of salt. After you've added the salt, you want to crack your eggs and put them into a separate bowl. We're going to whisk those up a little bit later. And then we start the hardest part, which is to cream the sugar and the butter together. Now you can use an electric mixer, but I like the workout, I like the challenge, so you will see that I do all of my mixing by hand. I have muted the audio so you can't hear me cursing, but it's hard work, but it's worth it. And as you mix it more, you will start to see the colour of the mixture starts to change. It becomes lighter. Now, as I say, we need to whisk those eggs up. Only beat them together. We don't want to create a meringue or anything like that. Just need to get them so that they're easier to incorporate into the sugar and butter mixture. Now when you add this, it does curdle a little bit, but I find if the ingredients are fresh like what I'm using, if you mix it well enough, you'll get rid of that curdling. If you find the curdling doesn't disappear, you can just put a little bit of the flour in there, just a dessert spoon or a tablespoon in, just to bind it together. But it doesn't really matter because you're going to add all this mixture to the flour anyway, so it'll come together eventually. But mine does curdle a little bit, but I keep on working it and it comes together. So I actually needed to transfer to a larger bowl here. I made a slight mistake and I sifted my flour into my large bowl, and I shouldn't have done. So rookie mistake. I've only been making this cake for 20 years and I probably do the same thing every year. So all I've done there is I've just transferred my sugar and egg mixture and my butter mixture into another bowl, and I'm starting to add the flour in now. So you add it a little bit at a time, a tablespoon at a time, and mix it in. But again, we're not trying to beat this together now because you have got all the air into that and you don't want to beat it out. So I've swapped from a whisk to a spoon now, and I'm just folding that mixture, that flour, into the mixture we made with the eggs, the butter and the sugar. So I'm adding black treacle. Now again, this is something that's not easy to find in the US. You can get it because I've got it, but I think I got it from Bush's, so you might get it from somewhere like Home Foods. It's just one dessert spoonful. If you can't get hold of it, I think something like maple syrup would be a good substitute. So we give that a mix, and then the next thing we do is we add the fruit a little bit at a time. I don't add it all at once because you want to make sure that the fruit is evenly distributed throughout the cake mixture. This is going to go in the oven for a long time, so we don't want to have any spots where all the fruit is stuck together. So as you can see, I've given this a really good, nice steady mix, adding a spoon of the fruit to the cake mixture a little bit at a time, and keep on giving it a stir. And then the final thing is to grate in the zest of a lemon and the zest of an orange. And there we go. So that is the cake mixture ready to go into the oven. Nice and evenly mixed, and that's what it should look like. So once you've made the cake mixture, you want to line your cake tin. I am using a 9-inch square tin. This was purchased off Amazon in the US, so you can get them. They're not easy to get hold of, but this is a particularly good one. The other option is an 8-inch round. Again, not a US standard, but you can get them, and you want to double line them with baking paper, baking parchment. And then once you've lined the bottom and the sides with baking parchment, you carefully spoon the mixture in, making sure that it goes all the way into the corners. And you do this nice and steady, and as you can see, that baking parchment, the paper doesn't move, and it is possible to get it in there. I do leave it stood up like that, nice and tall, because this is going to be in the oven for almost 5 hours, sometimes in excess of 5 hours. So it's important to protect it. So you spoon it in and make sure it's nice and level, and mine is all the way up to the top of the tin. This cake is not really going to rise, so you don't need to leave any space there. And then the last thing we do is we put a layer of the baking paper on top with a hole in to allow the steam to escape. And once that is done, it can go into an oven preheated to 275 Fahrenheit or 140 Celsius, which is gas mark 1, and it goes in there on a middle shelf for 4 3/4 hours. And what Delia suggests is that you do not look at it at all for at least the first 4 hours. So when you think the cake's done, you can remove it from the oven and take a look at it, and you can test it with a cake tester. But the way I usually tell is that you can see how it starts to crack slightly on the top. If you look at it after about 4 hours and it's not cracking like that, I don't think it's done. So I just like to leave it a little bit longer. This cake this year at 275 Fahrenheit took almost exactly 4 3/4 hours, just like Delia recommended. I looked at it at 4 hours and it had not cracked, so that extra 3/4 of an hour is what it needed. So you want to leave it in the tin to cool for about half an hour, and then the tricky part, very carefully removing it from the tin, because it's still warm, so it's still slightly soft, but you want to get it out of the tin because you don't want it to sweat in there, and you want to get it onto a cooling rack. So after a half an hour, carefully remove it and place it onto a cooling rack. And we can remove that paper, and as you can see, that is looking pretty nice. So once the cake's cooled, you want to wrap it in some baking paper and a tea towel and put it somewhere in a cool place for a couple of days. After a couple of days, you can remove it from the tin or the box that you've saved it in, and you can feed the cake. And this is the fun part. This is where we get a little bit more alcohol in there. And you can see that I got a cocktail stick, and I put some holes in there to allow the alcohol to drain in. And I am using a better quality whiskey for the feeding of the cake. I think for soaking the fruit, you can use a lower quality whiskey, because a lot of the alcohol is going to get burnt off and you're just going to get left behind with some flavour. But when you're feeding the fruit, that is not going to get burnt off. It's actually going to stay in there. So I am actually using a Bushmills Irish whiskey for the feeding. And I'll do this 2 or 3 times, and I'll probably get at least a third of a bottle, if not half a bottle of whiskey into the cake. I will probably feed this 3 times with around about 100 mils of whiskey each time. And then after each feeding, you want to wrap it back up in the paper. And then after the 3rd feeding, what I would do is I would still wrap it in the same paper, but then I would wrap it in some foil, just to create a tighter seal. And then that goes in the paper, in the foil, inside the the tea towel like I am doing, and into an airtight box where it will need to go somewhere cool. So that can be a basement, a garage, or a spare bedroom, and you will keep it there until it's ready for icing.